Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and I apologize for being a little bit tardy this morning. I want to start with some brief remarks on the situation on North Mississippi. From day one, my goals, publicly stated, were clear: to end the occupation and to protect lives. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're on our way towards achieving that. A key opportunity to de-escalate the situation was provided by the Kinney family and the property developer. They came to a mutual desire to reach an amicable resolution. Obviously, the city supported those conversations because they were the best means of de-escalating a potentially very dangerous situation. The Portland Police Bureau supported this strategy because it provided that opportunity for de-escalation. My administration was involved in facilitating the negotiations, but I want to be clear that this was two private parties who came to the table. I also directed the Portland Police Bureau to continue to plan in the event that the negotiations between these private parties collapsed. I want to thank both the Kinney family and the developer for their efforts, which have apparently resulted in a tentative agreement. I also want to acknowledge the tireless work of my staff, particularly Kristen Dennis, my chief of staff, Seraphy Allen, and Sam Diaz. Kristen, Sam, and Seraphy have spent the last several days working hard to facilitate the negotiations between the Kinney family and the developer. I also want to acknowledge our Tribal Relations Director, Laura John, and State Representative, Tana Sanchez, who also offered both their time and their guidance. Thank you. I also want to thank the Community Alliance of Tenants and community leaders for their help with these negotiations. The mayor's office used words, not weapons, to advance the well-being and the safety of the neighborhood by helping to facilitate this agreement on the Red House. I believe good governance requires open lines of communication, working relationships that we have in the community, mutual respect, and multiple strategies and skills to solve complex problems, which this one certainly is. The city made it clear that an occupation, particularly one where it appeared that there were firearms present, was unacceptable and would not stand. We then took the time to establish open lines of communication, understand the goals of the parties involved with the Red House, and work through the noise to identify immediate and ongoing steps that could help reach an agreement and protect the lives of police and residents in the community. Because of these conversations, we better understood the policies and the investments that get to some of the larger issues around banking, housing, land use planning, the criminal justice system that led all of us to learn more about the dynamics of the Red House. And through all of this, my staff were able to understand the Kinney family a little bit better as well, a family that from the very first meeting, and I want the public to know this, communicated to us directly their strong desire for a peaceful and diplomatic solution. I look forward to continuing to work with the Kinney family, the Community Alliance of Tenants, and people who understand and care about finding solutions for housing stability during the pandemic, and about racial injustice, and about predatory lending practices, and about gentrification and displacement. I hear the concerns felt by so many during times of uncertainty and overlying emergencies. From the concerns of the Kinney family to those concerns from those who live in the neighborhood, who created a petition encouraging the city to use political means rather than force to resolve this situation. A lot of hard work remains to be done, and there are ongoing risks around the Red House and with our current system, which continues to fail too many people that it claims to serve. So I want to also use this time to call attention to the political gridlock in Washington, D.C. and in Salem. Our eviction and foreclosure moratorium expires with no line of sight to a federal COVID-19 relief package. Support for rent relief is urgently needed. Unemployment assistance ends at the end of this calendar year. The CARES Act money also ends, and the city's relief programs have all been oversubscribed in literally minutes. I've advocated for months that we need more at every level of government. I've organized mayors up and down the West Coast to call for congressional action now. The Red House should remind all of us, we are in a crisis mode, and action is needed urgently. We need our federal, state, and county elected officials to act like it. We in the city of Portland need to do our job too. More than 45,000 families are at risk of eviction in this city come January. That risk is unacceptable. If something didn't sit right with you while you heard about and listened to the stories around the Red House, I urge you to call those who represent you in Congress, at the state, at the county level, so that they can help us take action to prevent similar situations like this from unfolding in the future. I urge you to call your friends and family in other states and ask them to do the same. And for those who want to learn more or want some help, the Community Alliance of Tenants here in Portland is a great resource. My office can also help connect people, so please write in and we would be happy to help. Again, I want to thank the Kinney family. I want to thank the developer for coming together as private parties and for your collective willingness to find a way to de-escalate this situation. I want to thank the Community Alliance of Tenants, State Representative Tana Sanchez, the Mayor's office staff, and our Tribal Relations Director, Laura John. I want to thank the Portland Police Bureau for your tireless efforts to encourage and support a de-escalation strategy. And thank you for continuing to work with me on all contingency plannings. And I want to thank the neighbors in the immediate neighborhood who have been deeply traumatized by the last several days. I want you to know you are not abandoned. And I appreciate the patience and frankly, the courage that you have exhibited during this very, very difficult situation. And we appreciate your efforts to support a nonviolent solution to this crisis. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Wheeler. I will now start with the reporters. I see hands up, and I'm going to begin with the first hands. I've been keeping order. And Shane, you were first. Shane Dixon Kavanaugh with the Oregonian. You have a question for the mayor?
Yeah. Hi, good morning, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Very loudly, yes. And we're going to turn it down, I hope.
Sorry about that.
Morning, Shane.
Hi, good morning. So you opened your remarks talking about how the Kinney family and the developer had come together to start negotiations. However, the Kinney family said in a press release this morning that the family has yet to be contacted by the developer or his counsel. So what are you talking about here if the Kinney family is directly contradicting what you just said?
Well, they are not talking directly, but they do in fact have negotiations going back and forth. And I believe, Shane, you will see, if you look at the news coverage that has been written, the developer has in fact offered to sell the house. There's an agreement in principle that I am aware of. The Kinney family is waiting for legal advice, and we have extended to them a list of attorneys that they can use for the closure of this project. But my understanding is this is on track. And if they are saying today something different, then that is news to me.
Okay, but the family's saying that they have not had any communication with the developer or his counsel, and that sounds very different from the way you characterize the progress on this front, which is the sort of linchpin to this whole situation being resolved.
Well, staff are definitely in communications with both parties, and they are serving as intermediaries and I'm very confident that they will reach an amicable resolution on this.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, next in line, Alex Zielinski with the Mercury. Alex?
Good morning,
Hi,
Alex.
yeah, good morning. One of the issues at the heart of the Kinney family situation is the lack of access to public defense for people facing eviction. I know funding for universal defense for low-income Portlanders was proposed in the fall bump, but didn't pass. You mentioned earlier kind of the need to act with urgency, and I'm curious if there's an expected increase, with the expected increase in eviction proceedings due to COVID, is this something you're planning on investing on in the future?
I certainly support it, and we have invested in the past, and that's certainly open for the future. But I would not count on the city of Portland's pocketbook alone supporting the projected 45,000 evictions that we're anticipating come January. There's more than the city. The county is out there as well as the state government, and that's part of my message today. Is we keep relying on the city to resolve all of these issues, which also have implications upstream. And we need to start talking about the upstream causes of the problem that we are then being asked to resolve here at the local level with limited resources.
So just to follow up really quickly, I totally hear you on that. I also know that in your official, first run for mayor, you really put a lot of energy behind the need for tenant protections, creating a tenant office for tenant protections, and really, putting more kind of city dollars kind of behind that. Is there, you say, you shouldn't rely completely on the city's pocketbook right now, but is there any funding in the pipeline for kind of legal protection with just this wave of evictions on the horizon?
Well, again, it depends. We're still waiting for Congress to act and acknowledge that local jurisdictions all around the United States need more CARES dollar support. We are not through the economic crisis created by COVID. And while we're all encouraged by the possibility of a vaccination sometime in the next 6+ months, for the majority of the population, the economic crisis is here now, and it's going to be with us for the foreseeable future, and we need that support. So, my local budget here, I just issued my budget guidance last week. I expect tens of millions of dollars in reductions in our budget. So if people are looking to us to be the last line of defense for those being evicted from their houses, we don't have the resources to serve that role without the support of county, state, and federal governments helping us to secure those resources.
Got it. Thanks.
But if there is another CARES Act, I would fully expect, like the last one, there would be support for all of these activities. Our last package included $35 million of rent support between the city and the county, and we provided other services in our budget, including legal aid.
All right, thank you, Alex. Next in line, Kelly Azar from K2 Television. Kelly?
Hi, Mayor. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I have two questions for you. The first one is, when we saw a autonomous zone being put up near your apartment in Portland, it was very quickly taken care of and removed by morning. This has been a much different situation of a group of folks taking over a street in North Portland that has gone on for nearly a week. What's the difference, and why the difference in action?
A couple of differences. Number one, this is much larger. Number two, there are reports of armed individuals, which makes this more than just a street removal. This makes this a much higher problem from a public safety perspective, not only from the neighbors in the immediate neighborhood, but also the police officers who we would be asking to go in. And they were well entrenched behind barricades, and we all have photographs of what's behind those barricades, and it includes some weapons and some combustibles. So as much as I think we would all love for these kinds of situations to be resolved immediately, I also have to take into account the safety of the officers that we are asking to go in and do to resolve this. And I have to take into account that this is a dense neighborhood. If there are, in fact, people who are armed and people start firing at each other, that could impact neighbors in the immediate neighborhood. We have to take all of that into account. And what I said on day one was that I wanted to protect lives and I wanted to end the occupation. Here we are 6 days later, and we're already seeing the barricades come down and those who are occupying the area leave. It's not done yet, but at least without anybody having to engage in any acts of violence or without putting my police officers at risk, we're making progress in the direction that we want to see it made.
And then my last question, if you will, is about, I'm sympathetic. I understand this year has been rough on all of us. So I understand not being able to pay rent is obviously a stressful situation for thousands of families out there. But this situation with the Kinney family was going on long before COVID-19. What's to stop folks from, in the future, deciding to occupy a street and take over a street because they either A, don't want to pay back or don't think they need to pay back a loan, or B, they just can't? Are we sending the wrong message here?
Well, I don't believe we are. And here again, my publicly stated position was on day one and remains that my primary objective is to protect lives and end the occupation. And I made it very clear on day one that we would not have an autonomous zone, that we would not allow an occupation, particularly an armed occupation of either public right-of-ways, city streets, or private property in the city of Portland. What's a little unique and one-off about this particular situation on North Mississippi is we had these two private parties who we believe have reached or are very close to reaching an amicable agreement. That gave us an opportunity to de-escalate a situation that otherwise was and is a worst case scenario for law enforcement. Well, I understand everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people are saying you need to go in and you need to act quickly. I want people to think about the consequences of what they're doing. They're asking our public employees, our law enforcement officers, to go into a situation where people are heavily fortified, potentially armed, and certainly have access to things like bottles and incendiary devices. I don't make that decision lightly. I want to think about the safety of those individuals, and also if it is true that there are people who are armed in that situation and bullets start flying, that puts at risk everybody in the immediate neighborhood who are occupying those houses. So we look at the totality of this. We saw a unique opportunity here between the Kinney family and the developer to potentially reach a compromise solution that could de-escalate the situation and cause some of those individuals to voluntarily leave. But the Portland Police Bureau did and is continuing to work on a strategy that does not, in the event that those negotiations collapse or don't reach fruition, we will not accept an occupation of any public right-of-ways in our city. That has been my position throughout my administration, and it continues to be.
But my question is, Mr. Mayor, what's to stop a family from doing this in the future?
Well, again, I'll say the same thing. My priorities will be to protect lives and to end the occupation. And if people think that showing up in Portland, Oregon, and let me step back and say that the right de-escalation strategy here is what I suggested up front, which is you have two private parties that want to reach an amicable solution. The city's not pushing anybody into any particular position. We are helping to facilitate those conversations, but they have created this opportunity. The way you negotiate is you come to the table and you talk. And if you have differences of agreement, you resolve them. The way you do not negotiate is show up with a firearm, take over public property, and say, I'm not going to leave until I get my way. That is very dangerous for you, and that is very dangerous for the community at large. So my message will stay the same, and our strategies will stay the same. The Portland Police Bureau will still have its strategies, but if we can de-escalate, we will de-escalate. I would also ask the county to work more collaboratively with us on this situation. I remind you that this was originally a Multnomah County Sheriff's Office operation. The Portland Police Bureau was there in a secondary mutual aid role. It is my understanding, the latest information I have is that no Portland police officers ever entered the Kinney house, despite a lot of the noise that's out there on Twitter and social media and the like. But then when the whole thing fell apart, it was up to the Portland Police Bureau to resolve this. And the Portland Police Bureau made it very clear to me up front that this was the highest risk situation that police officers could ever find themselves in. And because of the proximity to residences, it was of extreme high risk to those residents, and that we should latch on to any opportunity to de-escalate this situation. And the developer and the Kinney family, at least communicating publicly that they were both interested in this strategy, is something we absolutely latched on to. That doesn't mean that the Portland Police Bureau wouldn't continue planning for a different type of scenario. But as mayor, I felt it was absolutely imperative that I hang on to any opportunity to de-escalate and resolve this issue peacefully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Tim Gordon, KGW TV. You're next.
Hello, Mayor.
Morning.
Good morning. So I'm going to ask you, given what you just said, do you regret your initial posture, which was that Portland police should use all lawful means to end the illegal occupation? I mean, you took a pretty strong stand to begin, but you had to backtrack that.
No, I have not backed off, and I don't regret it, and I believe it 100%. The way you resolve conflict is not to occupy an area, particularly with the use of firearms, and then demand that you get everything you want. That is not a negotiation. That is extortion. And I will never accept that. But I'm really appreciative that in this case, where it could have been a very, very difficult situation, we had this opportunity with the Kinney family. And I want to be clear, there's multiple parts to this. You have the history of the Kinney family. And by that, I mean the historic racism. They were absolutely dinked around by bankers and predatory lenders. A lot of people in this community, particularly Black people, see themselves and their own families having been abused in those ways through systematic racism. And that's an important part of the dynamic. But as mayor, the part of this that ended up on my lap was the reality that I woke up and we had a bunch of people who had barricaded themselves in the middle of a city street, occupying public right-of-ways and private property, and reports that many of them were armed. That's what I inherited. And so when I say that I will not accept a occupation, particularly an armed occupation, I mean it. And when I saw what happened in the Chaz in Seattle, where not only was law enforcement denied access to that area, but so too were EMTs and medical professionals and families who wanted to visit people who were potentially frail in that area. I would never allow that. No mayor would.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. If I could ask a quick...
I do not regret it. If I have one regret, and I have said this to the Kinney family, if I have one regret, my regret is that because of the wording of my initial tweet, and there was literally like one, but it got retweeted a gazillion times as tweets do, it led to some very real threats, some very serious threats to the Kinney family. And that was not my intention. And I apologize to the Kinney family for that. Nobody should be under that kind of duress or threats. Nobody.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, next, E. Birch. I think it's Liz Birch from Coin TV. Is that who that is?
That is me. Yep, Liz Birch from Coin. So I want to come back to these negotiations that you say you're cautiously optimistic about. So what's in those agreements between the developer and the Kinney family? And are the family going to be allowed to live in their home and stay there while they're negotiating with the current owner?
I don't believe it's my place to talk about where the discussions are. I can only tell you that I'm very optimistic. There's a number of intermediaries working both with the developer and the family. And they are working on their own solutions. Again, this is a private party negotiation. We're not running the negotiations. We're not telling people what positions they should or should not support. We are facilitating. We are providing legal help to the degree they've asked for legal help. We are providing facilitation to the degree that we have people who know the parties and can be helpful in those facilitations. That's our role. I don't think it's my place to disclose what they are negotiating any more than I would disclose what any other private parties are negotiating.
But will the family be allowed to stay in the home? Will there be any kind of interference from the city coming in while these negotiations are ongoing?
It depends what they conclude. I mean, if they conclude a transfer of the property, I would certainly be open, absolutely, to the idea of the Kinney families having access to that property. Why wouldn't I?
In the meantime, though, while these negotiations are going on right now?
I don't think that's my place to say at this particular point. I'm not sure I know at this particular moment.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you keep coming back to how dangerous the situation is. What are your biggest concerns right now? What's keeping you up at night at this moment?
The worst case scenario is a shootout. If you have people who are barricaded, if you have people who have weapons, if you have people who are intent on using weapons, that would be a difficult scenario. And that's not one that any city or any law enforcement agency or anybody in the surrounding neighborhood wants to see come to fruition. I absolutely do not want to see that happen. And based on what I'm seeing today on North Mississippi, with people doing a lot of cleaning up the graffiti, taking down the barricades, I believe that's where Portlanders are as well. They want to see an amicable, peaceful, nonviolent solution to this situation. They don't want to see the use of force unless it's absolutely the last option.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Moving down the list, Bridget Chavez from KPTV. Bridget?
Hi, Bridget.
Yes. Good morning, Mayor. Is there a deadline that you have for when these barricades need to come down and traffic needs to continue to flow? And also, for those who are guarding the barricade right now, telling people that they can't move through, what's the plan for that? Or telling people that they can't be near or on public sidewalks?
I would tell them to leave. Nobody has any business telling other people where they can and cannot go on a public right-of-way. And if you're standing out there and you have a gun, or if you are threatening residents, you are breaking the law.
Is there a deadline for when you want those barricades to come down?
As long as progress is being made, and as long as the police bureau continues to advise me that de-escalation strategies are working, we will continue down that path. There's not a specific date or a specific time. So as long as progress is being made, we'll continue to keep the situation as de-escalated as possible.
One quick follow-up. Will those who have been occupying the area be granted immunity, or will there be more arrests?
No, people are held accountable for their actions. And again, if you're holding a weapon, you are not helping the situation, you are hurting it. We don't solve political differences or policy differences by holding on to a weapon. That, again, that is not negotiation, that is extortion.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. Moving down the row here, Richard Walker with Indian Country Today. Richard?
Morning, Richard.
Richard, are you there with Indian Country Today? Richard Walker, a question for the mayor. All right, next up is...
No, I'm sorry. I for some reason my computer muted. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Mayor, for your time. I appreciate it. I actually have like 10 questions, but I'll only ask 2.
Okay.
Okay, great. So looking at your police reform action plan, 19 steps in that plan that you propose to address financial policy and legislative issues in policing. How have people of color been involved or been represented in the development and implementation of that plan?
At every step of the way, starting with staff members who helped me draft the initial plans. I have a very diverse staff, and we come from many different lived experiences and backgrounds and perspectives, and they've been actively supportive not only of the drafting of that plan, but the implementation as well. We're working with many people in the community, not only elected officials, but others in the broader community. And some of those are also reflective of the work of others where we want to be strong allies. For example, 3 or 4 of those towards the end of that list are advocacy positions that I and my colleagues at City Hall can play in supporting the POC caucus in Salem, and we've already had some success in that regard. Some of the first items on that list are items that the BLM movement put forward as being important issues that they wanted to see being addressed. And I believe part of my job as mayor is to hear and to understand what the community is asking for, and to demonstrate that I've heard and understood what the community is asking for, and reflecting where I can what I've heard and what I understand in those documents. And so I think the first 3 items on that list actually came from community.
Okay, great. What's the status of the adoption of the action plan?
So we have completed 7, I believe by the end of the week. We've completed 8. By the end of this week, I believe we will have completed approximately 12, and I hope to get to the others quickly. So we're making very good progress.
Okay, great. If I could just ask one more question. So you've got a lot of issues that you're dealing with here.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Systemic issues, institutional issues regarding race and racial relations, and how people are treated by the system and in their communities. What else do you feel needs to be done to identify and resolve systemic and institutional racism and engage the community in dealing with those issues?
Great question. I'll put them under 2 broad areas. The first is letting the public know that this time of increased awareness of racial inequities, of disparities, of calls for reform, there's 2 ways we can approach it. We can approach it as a really challenging problem, or we can approach it as a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I see it through the second lens. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, in the state of Oregon, in the city of Portland, we have a long history of systemic racism. And whether you view yourself as a white person, I'll just talk about me, whether I view myself as racist or not racist is almost beside the point. The reality is the structures of our systems of power were created by and for people like me. And so there's systemic racism. And I don't see it as a problem that we have to acknowledge that and own it, because we can't fix it unless we acknowledge it and own it. And then we have this opportunity as a nation that's rapidly diversifying to really do US 2.0. We have this opportunity to start with this stable, strong, unified platform where we all move into the future in alignment on our values. And we can do that only if we acknowledge that a lot that exists about the status quo has the legacy of historic racism built into it. And so we should listen to people in our community, particularly the BIPOC community, about how the systemic racism that exists in our institutions, including policing, can be eliminated so we can actually strengthen these institutions and move on together. The second thing that has to happen, Richard, and it's a really good and provocative question, and we could probably spend a lot more time talking about it, is we have to understand that while the movement started, the latest iteration of the movement started with the murder of George Floyd, and the focus has been on public safety and policing, and certainly rightfully so in the short term, This is only the beginning. And the Red House situation, to weave this back to sort of the issue of the moment, the Red House situation has an intersection not only with public safety and the question of occupation and armed citizens and all that, but it also has an intersect with our historic racist past around redlining, around predatory lending, around injustices in access to capital and support, around home ownership for people of color, which, as everybody knows, is very, very low compared to the majority community. But this can't end with just police reform. If this ends with police reform, then we've done almost none of the job. We have to start talking about the inequities that exist in other systems of power and organizational authority in our society. And that includes everything from educational achievement, access to employment and economic prosperity, the banking system and access to capital, access to home ownership opportunities. It has to include access to healthcare, because you can still pretty much take a push pin, shove it into a map, and determine somebody's health outcomes decades later based on where they were born and raised and what their circumstances are. There's just so many other areas where we need to continue to do the good work. And while it may be painful and challenging and cause all of us to take a good hard look in the mirror, something that as humans we don't necessarily want to do on a regular basis, this is a real opportunity for this generation. This is our great opportunity as a generation to do what prior generations were unable to do, which is to understand and to own the systemic racism that exists today in all of these institutions, and to address them, to work together and move forward more unified into the future. That is the challenge that is before this generation now. And it's a challenge I believe that we will rise to overcome.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Rebecca Ellis with OPB.
Hi,
You're
Rebecca.
next.
Are you muted, Rebecca? I can't hear you.
Any better?
Yeah, there you are. Now we hear you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I have just one question. I mean, it kind of seems like from my vantage point at this point, what we saw play out this week or last week could very easily happen again. I've already seen talk from protesters who see this deal as a huge win for their strategy and this eviction blockade, and are already talking of future protests as a way to block these specific evictions taking place. And obviously, if there's no extension of the moratorium, we're going to see many, many more evictions, and there are going to be many more families who will be in the position of the Kinneys. So I guess I'm concerned. I'm curious if you're concerned that what we just saw could be an ongoing phenomenon.
Yeah, you know, it does concern me. And it could be an ongoing phenomenon, and I hope it is not an ongoing phenomenon. I have a couple of things to say on this point. Number one, it is really, frankly, disgusting when I hear people describe this as, quote, a win, unquote. We're talking about people's lives, and we are talking about safety. And if you think that negotiating at the head of a gun is a win, you need to reevaluate. You need to reevaluate. I also put my goals out at the very beginning. And I said, my goal is to protect lives and to end the occupation. Those are my goals. And I will do whatever is necessary and as peacefully as I can to achieve those goals. My goal is not to intimidate. My goal is not to hold a gun and wave a gun in people's faces and say, do it my way or the highway. My goal is still to find de-escalated solutions that protect the lives of the men and women in the Portland Police Bureau, the lives of the neighbors who are in the immediate vicinity of the occupation, and yes, the lives of people who are there participating in these demonstrations. This could have gone in a very different direction, and it could have gone that way quickly. So I'm really glad that I sit here 6 days later And so far, there have not been significant acts of violence. And it is my goal to continue to manage this situation with the objectives remaining to protect lives and to end the occupation. And ideally, it's done through nonviolent means. But people should not take this as, quote, a win or an opportunity to do it somewhere else. This is not how we resolve conflict in Portland, Oregon, at the head of a gun. That's not how you do it. You do it the way the Kinney family and the developer are trying to do it, which is trying to negotiate an amicable, peaceful solution that they can both agree to. That's how you do it. And then the second piece is we need to understand that the city of Portland's role in this was second fiddle to the county sheriff that was serving an eviction notice on behalf of Multnomah County. This was not a city of Portland action to begin with. We just ended up holding the bag after the fact. And so now that we have the bag, our objective is to protect lives and end the occupation. And nobody should take this as an invitation to do it anywhere else, because the end result could turn out very differently. We had this rare opportunity with these private parties who are willing to lead in this case, but this may be a one-off.
I'm curious if you do have that concern that this might not be a one-off and there's potential for this to play out again. Is there anything that you see the city being able to do to prevent that? I understand, obviously,
I'm already trying to do it. I'm telling people I want an amicable solution, but when you start pulling out guns and you start occupying city streets, I'm just telling people that is a very dangerous strategy, not only for you, but for everyone around you. It's a very selfish strategy. That's not how we do things in Portland, Oregon. It's not how we should do it anywhere.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, we had one more question, but your hand went down. Nat, do you still have a question for the mayor with KBOO Radio?
No, thank you. It's already been answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat.
Thank you.
Well, that'll wrap it up then. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. And 2020 is almost over.